The first time I've had a microphone. I have a lot to say about Joey, but I'll get to him after. And before I start, there's a lot of history in this house. It's actually very strange that I'm here right now. I grew up in this house. This house was actually one of the first purchased houses in Deal. When everybody was still living in Bradley, this was the house of my grandparents, Eddie and Gladys. So I didn't know I was speaking here until a few days ago, and then that's when I knew that I was meant to speak here tonight. Before I introduce myself, I would like to say one thing. Before you judge me, during or after you hear the speech, I would like to say that I already plead guilty. I admit my guilt. I accept and take responsibility for all the charges against me. I also am in the process of asking forgiveness for everyone that was ever hurt throughout my journey, whether it was mentally, emotionally, or monetarily. I'd also like to bring up another piece. I trust this crowd tonight, and I trust this community. Although the stigma is real about how we gossip, how we make judgments and assumptions, and how the speculations and the rumors spread like wildfire. Despite that, I have complete faith in this process. I've lived all over the world amongst different nations, and I've developed amazing relationships outside of this community. But at the end of the day, I know that this is my only home, and if I can't trust this community, then I can't trust anybody. And without the support of my fellow Syrian Sephardic Jews, I have no support in this world. There was a time when I wanted out. I wanted nothing to do with our bubble. But ever since then, I've came to my senses, and with all my heart, I love this community, and I'm so proud to be grateful and be a part of it. I know that we are the most blessed and special people in the world. Some of you know me, some of you have heard of me, and for the rest of you, this is our first encounter. My name is Stephen Shabbat, and I'm 28 years old and was born and raised here in Elberon, New Jersey. I stand here and introduce myself and say my name with pride, dignity, and self-respect and confidence. For the second half of my life, this would not be possible, as I lived in shame, guilt, regret, and constant remorse. I've suffered with low self-esteem, depression, anxiety, and all for good reason. If you were to ask about me, the responses most likely would not be good. My name has been tarnished and associated with drug addiction, cigarette smoking, womanizing, neshech, manipulator, con artist, and beyond. But you know what? I can't blame them. I take full responsibility for how everything has become so ugly. One thing you would hear, though, and this is the only reason why I'm up here tonight, is that he has a very, very special family of remarkable chesed, character, kindness, and humility. All the traits which unfortunately I had lacked and actually was incapable of comprehending. Again, I will state my family is the only reason why I'm here tonight and why I still have a fighting chance at restoring myself as an active, productive member of this beloved community and in society in general. Unlike 98% of the world, when I was born, I was dealt a very strong hand, a royal flush. I had the full package, all the tools that would destine me for success. I was the youngest in four, and so naturally, all the attention and spoils went to me. I had the amenities this world could only dream of. Magnificent house with a large playground, backyard, a basketball, tennis, and swimming pool. All the privileges that we take for granted. Exotic vacations semi-annually, private schools, summer camps, sports lessons, restaurants every Sunday night, and most importantly, a loving, supportive, and tight-knit family. My housekeeper, Margarita, who practically raised me as her own child, was literally, and I mean literally, wiping my ass clean until I was 13 years old. She was at my beck and call at all times. It was if I was the king of my own country within my house. Naturally, this would work against me as I grew up spoiled and entitled. Now, don't get me wrong, my parents are not to blame for this. They did all the right things. They parented me correct. They kept boundaries. They did not just give me whatever I want. My brother David, who was a few years older, grew up with the same circumstances, but he did not distort it the way I did. He gained humility and gratitude, but I did not. On top of this, Hashem also blessed me with great health, good looks, charms, charismatic personality, and a high-functioning brain. My potential was able to be spotted from a mile away at a very young age. Growing up, at least every other month, my father would constantly remind me that I had it all, and that I could do and be whatever I want, and as long as I did the right thing and just walk a straight path, he would forever support me in all my endeavors. I was really gifted and really blessed, but as things would unravel, I wouldn't even be able to meet the minimal standard of living. In a calculated move, my mom decided to hold me back in kindergarten, so I'd be able to have an edge in my grade. But when early elementary started, that edge that I had was blatant. I was way ahead of the 8 ball early. I was grasping the world at quick rates. Within my grade, I was a dominant figure. I started to understand socioeconomic differences. I was gaining knowledge of the world, cultures, politics, music, films, and pop culture. This came from a combination of two things. My father was in the music business, and I was taking an interest in his stores, Record Explosion. Secondly, my 2 older brothers were the biggest influences in my life, and my brain would sponge everything that they were interested in. I had no interest in people my age. I just wanted to be with the older crowd. Gaining the attention of my brothers and their friends is what boosted my ego and gave me confidence as an adolescent. I became very interested in materialistic luxuries early as well. I recall getting very into Italian fashion around the 3rd grade. I asked for an Armani belt and a shirt for my 8th birthday, just so I can show it off all over the school. Nobody in my class had a clue what Armani was. I was sitting in the front seat of my mother's car when all my classmates were still in the back. I was really just determined to grow up quick, and I wanted everybody to know it. With all the natural tools and competitive advantages I possessed, you would think that this description of a kid that I described so far would be the recipe of confidence, self-esteem, and success. But in fact, it was the opposite. Internally, I was very shy. I developed feelings of insecurity. I became socially anxious. I just did not feel comfortable in my own skin. I soon developed this need for attention, but to a very high extent. I needed attention and validation with my friends, and I had the greatest group of friends growing up. Something just was off. I didn't feel comfortable. I didn't feel comfortable in my own skin. Getting into bar mitzvah age and getting introduced into the community scene with the parties and the girls, I had zero confidence in myself that I fit in. My internal insecurity and low self-esteem were festering. I'd be socially anxious at these parties that I would be cringing. My shyness was apparent. My mind would be racing. All I could think about is, what were people thinking of me? Did they think I was off? Did they accept me as one of them? I had a lot going on in my mind. I wanted to talk, but the words would not come out, especially when there are people who I didn't know around. But with my core friends, I was very loud and active. To counteract this internal struggle, I started to adapt my shield of defense. This defense is called ego. Ego, pride, and eventually narcissism. We can all agree that growing up in this community as a kid is not so easy. It's a lot of pressure, especially when you see the privileges that other kids have that you don't. Living in this community, in the mainstream, is constantly keeping up with the Kardashians. So the way this affected me is I lost gratitude. I had zero gratitude for all the gifts and blessings that were given to me. I was grateful for nothing. I just wanted more. Nothing was enough. I needed to fit in at all times. I needed to be validated. I needed material gain and exterior pleasures to fill the void that was developing within. Even though I had this void, this early symptom of something not being right, I would not invite people in to show them my vulnerabilities. Most importantly, my family. When asked, "How are you?" my answer was always good. Everything was always fine. My pride was growing stronger, and I would never, by any means, admit that I wasn't okay, or admit that I was having a bad day. I was very strongly willed to not show that I was struggling. My pride became so strong that I would never ask for help. I didn't want to show anyone that I was weak. And patterns started to become. I took matters into my own hands. I did things Stephen's way. In my mind, people who asked for help and guidance was a sign of weakness. This personality trait progressed and progressed. To give myself some esteem, I would become compulsive in my actions for looking for attention and validation. I would go to extreme levels that became toxic, pulling fire alarms, fabricating stories, and even lying about material facts just to make myself appear to be doing better or to be cooler than everybody else. My attention-seeking behavior became toxic. In fact, it became a big distraction. I was becoming a full-time job to maintain this image. I stopped performing in school because I didn't want my classmates to think I needed to try. That's how demented my mindset became. Slowly but surely, people became victimized by my actions. I became a bully and a punk. I wasn't able to develop any sort of morals and values, or empathy and compassion for others. It was non-existent. I was so self-centered, I could only think about myself. Instead of asking my father for money, I would just go into his closet and take it. I didn't want him to think that I needed it. I didn't want him to think that I needed anything. I realize now that I was an addict way before I started using drugs. I needed more everything. More video games, more candy, more allowance, more clothes, more TV, more WWF, more. I needed more to fill me up. Moderation was never my way. I became a black and white thinker. It was all or nothing. Everything was in excess. Either I loved you or I hated you. I became an instigator within my friends and a master manipulator. I could never be the one in the fight. I would be on the sidelines enjoying it, somehow being able to create it using calculated tactics to diverge the attention from me. I fed off that action. Other people's misfortunes became my comfort, would make me feel better about myself. A little monster within was developing, but this monster was the early result of a little, shy, insecure boy who was just trying to get out of his own reality. And when I turned 14, that's when I met alcohol, marijuana, and cigarettes. And this is where the party starts. My father used to love to say, if you put 10 boys in a room together, and you introduce them all to their first drink, their first joint, their first girl, their first bet, or their first cigarette, 8 of them will be able to take it in a manner where it doesn't affect their development. They'll enjoy it, but it won't control them. One of them will have no interest in any of these things, and he'll stay relatively clean for his whole life without any urges or desires. But that 10th boy will completely take over his every decision moving forward, will be navigated by his desires. Me, I was that 10th man, and after my first usage respectively, I never looked back. I never considered the consequences of what could be. Usually when someone smokes pot for the first time, they'll probably not feel to do it again for a week, or weeks, or months, but for me, I needed it the next morning, the next night, and pretty much every day after that. I became addicted immediately. I became addicted to cigarettes immediately. Alcohol, not so much addicted, but I loved the way it made me feel. Forget about the feeling of being loose. I loved how it made me not think about my problems. And any sort of pain or suffering I was going through was completely numbed. Joe, you have a towel? Things changed very quickly. I lost all interest in my core best friends. Things changed very quickly. I lost all interest in my core best friends who, at the time, I had no idea how lucky I was to have. I lost interest in my passions, which primarily was sports. I was a dominant athlete and an avid sports fan. I quit playing and following sports at 14 years old. It didn't take long for the progression of addiction to get me in trouble. My parents found out within weeks. In fact, I remember Spike Dweck, coming to visit me in the 8th grade. I had to start lying to my parents about everything. What I was doing, where I was going, who I was with, and so lying about everything became a regular part of how I functioned. It got to the point where nobody was able to understand me or connect with me. I could not speak within my house. I would avoid my siblings and my old friends. I'd have to sneak in and out of my house because I was always stoned. I stopped caring about school. I didn't even attempt homework anymore. I was becoming a rebel without a cause, a rolling stone, a lost soul. My instability became very clear. but nobody would really address it with me except my parents, who I would naturally tune out. I was changing friends like changing t-shirts. Every day there was a new friend or a new crew. I got sick of people very quickly, so therefore I was constantly bouncing around within social circles. Nobody hurt me. I didn't grow up in a broken home. Nobody abused me. Nobody was ever mean to me. Up until 13, I received the love and support that any kid could ever ask for. But I was sick. I was suffering from depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, and insecurity that went unaddressed for years. Drugs and alcohol became my medication. I had to escape my feelings. I always had to be out of the house and be with people. I could not sit with myself or be in my own skin. I was running away from myself and my emotions, so therefore I completely lost touch with myself. The consequences were menial. My parents did their best and everything in their power to help me. They sent me to SAFE, they sent me to different therapists. I took very advanced personality testings. They took away my phone. They even once took away winter vacation. They tried it all. They came down hard on me, and then they changed course and they tried being loose, hoping I would grow out of it. But that was not going to happen anytime soon. Somehow I was able to survive the high school years and my teens unscathed without any major consequences. By the time I was 17, I already transitioned back into the mainstream circle of my generation, as pretty much everyone my age was smoking pot and drinking and partying. I kept close with a lot of friends between Deal and Brooklyn, and my popularity level was pretty good. I always was surrounded with friends, and I was becoming a very personable character. I started dating girls and getting more involved. My nasty reputation didn't really bother me. I couldn't even see that I had bad reputation because I was very involved in the social scene, but most importantly, always in denial of any problem I would have, no matter how significant. As my 20s started, consequences would start kicking in. I did not finish high school, as I defaulted to yeshiva in Israel for my senior year and retained my GED. I did not go to college, although I was able to somehow manage to go and study abroad in Italy for 7 months. I had no vision or desire to do anything productive. All I cared about was partying and having a good time. And by the time I was 20, I started with other drugs. Cocaine, Percocets, Xanax, and of course, the party drugs Molly and ecstasy. I loved the effect. I loved the process of getting high. But what was really happening was I was medicating and I was escaping. I had zero life balance, no religion, no decent family relationships, no good causes or deeds, no education, and no motivation. My only motivation was for partying and getting high. In 2010 and 2011, that's when things initially started to spiral out of control. Problems started to pile. A DWI, some poor financial decisions that got me in trouble with employers and friends. I had minimal relationships with my family, and I would steer as far away from them as possible. When my parents were in New Jersey, I would be in the city apartment. When they were in the city, I would be in the New Jersey house. They knew I wasn't right, and that I was hiding from them. And that's when they started entertaining the idea that I got serious help. And that was the first stint. After they invested a lot of time and resources into different therapists and life coaches and consultants, finally I got to the point where they didn't know what to do with me anymore. Stephen, you're not well and you need help. You need to go to a rehab. Of course I fought it, but they gave me the ultimatum. Either you're going away or you need to leave the house. So I did. I got on the plane. First stop, Hawaii. 3 months in a wilderness therapy called Pacific Quest, which until this day was one of the greatest experiences in my life. I was introduced to healthy living, organic lifestyle, gardening, and Zen philosophy. It was 3 months of figuring out myself, what was wrong with me, and how to cope with life challenges. The second stop was southern France, where I spent a month in a gap year program, but I got kicked out for bad behavior and not following the rules. After this failure, I was shipped to Colorado for another 3 months at a men's therapeutic transitional program. This is when I started to fight the process. My ego came back. I fought the therapist. I was not willing to do the work. I thought I was fine again and was ready to go back home. I just wanted to go back home and start life over and get back into the scene. Throughout this process, I was not serious about recovering or about getting clean. I was just doing it to make my parents happy. I was also not yet done using. I was very far away from my rock bottom. I benefited from the experience because I learned a lot about myself, but self-awareness is only the first step. Willingness is the second. And I was not willing to quit. I had a lot of more damage that I needed to do. After Colorado, I went to LA where I was in a very loose environment. It was an intensive outpatient where I lived in an unsupervised apartment and I was back to having full freedom. This is when after 9 months I picked up the first drink again. Very lightly though. I didn't see the harm and I felt no guilt about it. I was still in complete denial that I had a substance abuse problem. I dabbled with sober life. I connected with the community guys that were in the program, but I didn't see it. I didn't want it for myself. And so a year after I went away the first time, I was back in Deal. I came back home. In fact, I was back and better than ever. I was getting a lot of attention from everybody that I was missed and loved because nobody saw me in a year. I was loving the attention that summer and I really capitalized on it. Within weeks of returning, the gradual process started. First it was the alcohol, then it was one hit of a joint, and by the end of the summer it was back to the old regimen of smoking pot every day, every night, and hard drugging sporadically. I got through the next 4 years, bouncing around different jobs and whatnot. I was using every day. My depression and unhappiness was progressing. I started feeling real feelings of regret. I regretted not doing well in school because now I was lost and I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. Friends were getting married and making progress. I was not even close. There was a dark hole within me of emptiness, and the only thing that I knew how to do was to feed it with all that I knew how. Drugs, partying, sex, girlfriends, chasing easy money. I needed to not feel my emptiness. I even managed to leave the country and move back to Florence, Italy for another 7 months, a place where I could escape reality. The excess there was to another level. If I were to say what was going on there would not be believed. I had no desire to change. I had no motivation to change. And even if I did, I wouldn't know how. I continued using people for my needs, whomever they were. Friends, people, family, girls, all I wanted was I could get out of them to satisfy myself. I was selfish, self-centered, and narcissistic. This was my only tool. This was my only coping method. But only I know what I was going through. And please try and understand this when I say, I wasn't a bad person with a black heart who had bad intentions who wanted to hurt people. I was a sick person who was very ill and had no tools with how to go about life. I did not know how to carry a healthy relationship. I did not know how to have empathy. All I cared about was myself. I was a taker and not a giver. And by 2016, I was at a new low point. I was 6 months into my new favorite drug, the most addicting feel-good drug on the market. These are the 30 milligram oxycodones. You have a better chance of winning the lottery than getting off these once you're under their grasp. This was my new drug of choice. After 6 months of using these on a daily basis, I became so out of tune, it was becoming clear to everyone around me. The problem with the Roxys are they make you feel too good. Initially, it's like magic. You start even operating at a high level. You work better, you talk better, you get confidence. In your mind, all your troubles vanish. But after months of using it, you don't see how you're not yourself. Everyone else around you knows there's something wrong with you, but you're blind to it. And soon things go really south really quickly. I left a very steady, good job that I held for over 2 years. I was not working. I was isolating from everybody. Even close friends of mine started making calls to my brothers saying that I was involved with this very dangerous and addicting drug. My depression level was hitting an all-time high. I would wake up every morning in my New York apartment. I would look outside the window and see society going to work and I knew that I didn't want anything to do with it. It was very cold, snowy, and gray winter at this time. And I was loving that. I just wanted bad weather. Bad weather was my comfort zone, because bad weather was on par with my emotions. The only thing that would make me feel comfortable and safe is when a blizzard would hit New York, and everything was shut down. When the banks were closed, transportation was closed, government offices were closed, and when businesses were closed. I loved when the city was immobilized. This is how depressed I was. The only thing that made me happy was in shitty weather and when society couldn't function properly. That was my comfort zone. Safe and cozy is what I would call it. During the day, I was bedridden. During the night is when I would do my benders. I had my routine. Shower, eat something, put on my pajamas, and start my private party. It would be a cocktail of drugs that would need to get me through the night. An oxycodone to start, some marijuana to kick-start the oxy. I'd open a bottle of wine for the warm and fuzzy effect. Sometimes there would be cocaine, especially on Thursday and Saturday nights, and a Xanax for the nightcap. Night in and night out. If I could still feel my body, then I wasn't high enough. If I wasn't crawling around the house to get from room to room, then I wasn't high enough. I was aware of my real-life problems, which became too overwhelming to handle. My financial debt was growing. I had no income. I had open problems with the DMV. I had open court dates in Jersey City and Manhattan for driving issues. I had a suspended license. People were after me. Banks were calling. The DMV was calling. Creditors were calling. My father was calling to see what the hell was going on, what I was doing about work. I was in hot water. I was in trouble. My life was a mess, and it became completely unmanageable. It was at this point where I cooked up a plan that I needed to go away. I needed to get out of town, and the realistic only option was to go to a rehab. So upon my own will, I informed my father that I needed help. I laid out everything on the table. I set up a meeting with Spike, and I was on a plane the next day, this time to Karen Renaissance in Boca Raton. I'm going to be honest here, because this is what this program is all about, rigorous honesty. In my heart, I wasn't done. I didn't want to give it up. I still thought I can live a normal life and still be able to use drugs. I was honestly still living in denial. Sending myself away was just a manipulative move to run away from my problems. I'm a great rehab patient. I was able to go through 6 months of the most intensive, prominent rehab in the country and doing the deal. I was very involved. I was active in all therapy. I was a great productive member of the community there. On the surface, it looked like I was a star on the way to the promised land of recovery. It was all manipulation. I wasn't really working it. I wasn't getting into the deep-rooted issues that needed to be addressed. I wasn't being 100% open and honest and willing. And for that, I did not improve anything. It was all an act, a very good act. I'm a great actor. After 6 months, I got burnt out. The entire clinical team, with my parents on board and Ike, very involved, they made their suggestions. And they knew I needed more time. They knew I wasn't ready yet. They knew I didn't address with them what I needed to address. But I was strong-willed. I went back to my belief system, my distorted thinking. I went back to Stephen's way, because Stephen knows best for him. I believed I was ready to get out and get back to starting my life. I didn't need help anymore. 3 days after formally checking out of Karen, I landed myself in Palm Beach County Jail. This is what happens when an alcoholic or an addict tries to do things his way. He lands in jail and institutions. It's only a matter of time. This was the ultimate devastation. After I was released the next day, I couldn't even face my family. I knew they were destroyed. I knew they were in shock. I knew they had to be in serious pain. I was filled with so much shame and embarrassment, but what was hurting me the most was my ego. Again, I thought I could do things on my own, and I failed. I was still filled with pride that I couldn't give up on my way. I did not ask my family for help. So then at this point, I was alone. I refused the support, and I was left to my own devices. The next year and a half were the most difficult time in my life. I did not ask my family for help. So then at this point, I was alone. I refused the support that was there for me from Safe and Karen, and I chose to be left to my own devices. I could not return home because I was on probation, so could not leave the state of Florida. Communicating with my family was superficial at best. The episode of jail and probation did not change anything. I had nothing except my luggage, which was 2 suitcases, 2 backpacks, and some garbage bags. I was homeless, and all that remained was my pride and ego. I bounced around between hotels, motels, Airbnbs, Craigslist rentals, friends' apartments. It was a living nightmare, every day. All the while, I gradually started drinking and drugging again. To survive, I had to start scamming. I would tap into my father's bank accounts and make transfers. I would access credit card numbers that were home to get money. When an addict refuses help and he is left to his own devices, he will do anything to survive, and that includes any means necessary. All while living on the balls of my ass, I still tried to keep an image. I tried to make it as if my life was manageable. I hung around and frequented top places of Miami. I somehow was able to bob and weave and get a job with a Syrian company down there, and I rented an apartment in Turnberry Village. In summer 2017, I met a Syrian girl from Mexico City, and we got into a relationship. Her and her family were in Miami for the summer. Her parents started to love me. We got into a serious relationship. Even though I wasn't allowed to leave Florida without permission, I still went to see her in Mexico City after they moved back in September. But they didn't know the truth. They thought I was living in Florida on business. I even brought her the deal for Rosh Hashanah. I was delusional. I actually believed that I was a normal person in a position to be entertaining the idea of a serious relationship. As addicts, we become delusional, and we believe our own lies. Eventually, she caught on to the truth, and the reality began to unravel. Our relationship went cold just as quickly as it got hot. She was done, and another bridge was burned. But this was no different than any other relationship I ever had. I was never capable of giving genuine love and honesty because I never could love and be honest with myself. When you can't love yourself, it's impossible to love anybody else. How could I ever take care of anyone else when I can't take care of myself? This really hurt me. Having her leave me was a major blow to me at the time, because she was really all I had that made me feel any self-worth. This was my big problem in life. I needed to find my value and my self-worth through other channels, primarily through other girls. Getting them to love me and validate me was what I needed to feel well. I couldn't find it within myself, because inside me was that ever-growing black hole. Artificial wellness was the only source of feel-good endorphins. I once again hit a dark, deep depression of loneliness. Of course, I went back to my only way of medicating, my only way of not feeling, drugs and alcohol. Things got really dark. I was miserable. I started to isolate. The shame and the guilt of my entire life was playing on repeat in my head, 24/7. I started to see how unhappy and desperate I was to do something, to change, but I had no idea how. I had no idea where to even start. I was ready to tap out when the life-changing, defining event happened. I was arrested in Miami for violating probation a few months earlier. They put me in jail, and this time there was no bail. I couldn't get out even for $1 million. They were holding me indefinitely without any sort of bond until I saw a judge for what could have been a span of months. And do you know what? I was actually happy inside. Being locked up was where I needed to be, because I knew that was it. This was rock bottom. I finally hit it. I knew it couldn't get any lower than this. The only way to go was up. I did not yet mention the most important part of the story, and that is Hashem. Hashem, who I avoided, ran from, and literally tried to hide from for the past 14 years, was with me the whole time. He never gave up on me, and he was waiting for me to come back to him. And this was our reunion. It was just me and him inside. He was the only thing that could help me. Sometimes Hashem challenges us. He makes life difficult because he wants us to come close to him. When we are challenged and going through difficult times, we need to know that it's Hashem's love for us and he wants our attention. After three days of praying to him for help, he delivered me my first sign that he was with me and very aware of the circumstances. He sent me my cellmate, a 27-year-old Israeli Jew named Avishai. In a jail filled with the most lowly criminals of Dade County, Hashem sent me my angel to protect me and be with me. For the next week, me and Avishai were able to pray with tefillin, learn Torah, eat kosher, and just connect. Everything got very clear for me. Hashem loves me and he wants me to come home. One of my great friends turned me on to this idea last week, actually, saying he heard a great rabbi explaining an idea from the Chafetz Chaim. In the world that we live in, there's the famous idea that everybody deserves a second chance. But where we come from as Jews, that is total falsehood. As Jews, we have as many chances as Hashem is always there waiting for us to come back, and that he will always support us and guide us. He will never give up on us. When everybody gave up on me, there was only Hashem. And I need to mention this. My father, Joe Shabbat. I need to especially acknowledge him. He never gave up on me, no matter all the pain and damage that I caused. All the times that I screwed him over. All the chances he gave me to clear up my slate, and I'd immediately go back out. He was always waiting for me to turn it around. And he was always ready, willing, able to give me all the resources he had to help me. And of course, Safe and Ike Dweck, who are always willing, always waiting for me. So the process began. After 11 days, I got released. First step was I had to admit that I had a problem and that I was powerless over my addiction and my compulsive behaviors. I admitted defeat. I knew the tank was empty. I ran out of lies and schemes. After 14 years of living a damaging and destructive lifestyle, I was finally willing to give it up, and I knew I needed to make a change now, or else I would have no chance. At this point, it was a long shot. I was the 100-to-1 horse in the Derby. Not many would be willing to take a gamble on me. I immediately started with a therapist and a psychiatrist. I started with the right medication to help my depression and anxiety. A little jump start for a dead battery. I put my life down on paper and reevaluated all my options. What I did, where I was, and where I needed to go. I started to go into AA meetings daily. I was in constant touch and started to develop a support network. I cut out the toxic people, places, and things. Within weeks, things started changing. The fog cleared up and the momentum started building. One day at a time. It's the only way to work this program. If I start thinking about tomorrow, next week, or next month, or next year, it will not work for me. If I say to myself or to others that I will not drink or drug again, that will be a big red flag. All I can say is that I will not have one today, or just not right now. Let me make one thing clear. Drugs and alcohol was not my problem. It was never my problem. Drugs and alcohol were the solution to my problems. The problems that I never wanted to address. It's called dual diagnosis, where addiction to drugs and alcohol is a symptom to the core issues. The issues of depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, lack of purpose, not having direction, jealousy, envy, greed, being too proud to let people know that's how I'm feeling. I'd rather stay quiet than ask for help. I'd rather lie than tell the truth. I'm not sharing this story so I can come off as a victim or to gain your pity, but just to expose the facts that I was sick and suffering. I'm not a bad guy trying to get good. I was a sick person who's trying to get well. I'm proud to say that I have not had a drink, a drug, or a cigarette since May 4th, 2018. Since moving back to Deal last year, it's just been miraculous. I'm an active member in my family. My relationship with parents and siblings just gets better. I'm no longer a liability. I'm now becoming an asset. I'm starting to gain their trust back. I'm learning to be other-centered rather than self-centered, thinking of other people first before myself, helping others in need, doing what I can do to help others who are also battling this disease. I currently visit and volunteer Jewish inmates who are in jails and prisons throughout the East Coast. I care about myself and my body. I love to train, I like to eat healthy, and keep myself in shape. I'm finally able to find the fulfillment within. There is no end, though. It will always be a lifelong process with working on myself and getting better. As Jimmy Haddad said at the SAFE fundraiser the other day, this disease at best can go into remission. There's not a complete cure. We always need to be on guard. If you haven't been able to put it together, I'm a sensitive person. It's a common trait with all addicts. We always care what people think. We're enslaved to our selfish thoughts. We let people take a lot of real estate in our brains. If I'd walk into a room with 30 people and 29 of them would say hello, but one of them didn't acknowledge me, I wouldn't even think about the 29. I would only think about the one person who didn't say hello. I'd ask myself 100 questions, and it would be the only thing that I could think about, maybe for days or weeks or months. I'd probably start a full investigation on why he didn't say hello to me. That's just how my brain has always operated, self-centered. I torture myself with this kind of thinking. I call it addictive thinking. But I'm working on this. And the only other way we work on these character defects is by working the program. AA, sponsorship, and the 12-step program. You may ask, how can one live with himself, knowing what he did? I need to say that I have no regrets anymore. No shame about any of this. Actually, I'm very proud. And I feel fortunate for my experiences. I cannot dwell in the past. I cannot live in regret, because if I did that, I will not be able to move forward. I know now what my mission in life is. Maybe it's not to be the most popular guy. Maybe it's not to be a very wealthy guy. But I'm convinced that my mission was to make a comeback, to struggle and to be defeated by my challenges, Yetzer Hara and demons, to hit rock bottom, and to be able to recover, and to make something of my life. And most importantly, to help anybody who needs help, to make some sort of positive difference, to be an asset and not a liability. Recovery this year has not been easy, by any means. In fact, it can get very lonely. When I was active, my addiction in my life was filled with action, nightly action. Now, sometimes I go days when my phone doesn't ring. It can get very quiet. I can get in my head sometimes and have those old desires, feelings of boredom and negative thoughts. But fortunately now I have the tools to be able to cope and to make the right decision. I now know to cope when I don't feel great. I know exactly how to navigate through my struggles. I have an amazing support network, and I'd like to finish off giving my shout-outs. Joey and Marilyn Cabasso. Without Joey, I would not be here. If I ever think of doing something not so kosher, all I need to do is think of Joey, and immediately the thought changes. This is a guy that I talk to maybe 7, 8, 9 times a day. My entire family, Mom, Dad, Jordana and Eddie, Eddie and Sherry, and David and Alexis, for never shutting the door on me. Spike Dweck and the entire SAFE organization. Another guy, Spike is another guy, he'll never give up on anybody, no matter how many times they fail him. My sponsor, who's not here tonight, Bobby G, who has 28 years in AA and GA, who guides me through the program. He's my mentor and my navigator. My rabbis, Moshe Malka and Joey Dayan, for getting me back into the shul action, and every rabbi in this community. Max Farka, who has been there for me throughout Max Farka has been with me throughout this entire journey, whose friendship is critical. and his wife Raquel, who always accepted me. Happy birthday, Raquel. Okay, I gotta wrap it up. My 20 nieces and nephews, who are always a key part to why I needed to come back to life. Dr. Morris Anthony, who... What? Oh, okay. If I could recover, anybody could recover. Please don't give up. Don't judge people. Don't give up on them. Always give them a chance. Even the world's biggest degenerate, who is filled with total darkness, there's a little spark within him that can be activated. Also, when we are heavily challenged, going through hard times, and things can be like they're bad, there's a time to know that Hashem loves us. It's intentional, and it's because He wants us to come close. For anybody in early recovery, just take it one day at a time, and don't quit until the miracle happens. That's all I got. Thank you for letting me share. Cool.